All right, hi, I'm Sarah Pulaski, and this is my project for GHS 204 over extractivism. So I chose to do my project over soybean extractivism in Argentina. So I will share my screen and we will get this going. Okay, I think that's good. So as I said, this is about soybean extractivism in Argentina. So I thought I would start off just by defining some of the key terms. Obviously, extractivism is the appropriation of natural resources through invasive practices with the goal of exportation to global markets. Then agribusiness is commercial activity related to agriculture, which is obviously really important when talking about soybeans, agriculture. The pink tide, that's referring to the shift toward left-leaning progressive leaders in Latin America in the 21st century. And so when I talk about some politicians, we're going to see this term come up. And then biohegemony, which is a term describing how the corporate or state elite are able to silence dissent and promote extractivism as desirable for society. And so we'll see this come up later too. So I thought I would start off with a little timeline to kind of contextualize some of the events that I'm going to be talking about in this presentation. So first of all, in the 1960s, we saw soybeans first planted in the Pampas. And so this was a region in Argentina where it was just kind of like an open field, but this was also indigenous land. And so this was like our first like major step towards soybeans becoming a major crop in Argentina because they are not native to this region at all. In 2002, the mothers of, I'm going to butcher a lot of words, I'm really sorry. The mothers of Zango was founded. In 2003, Nestor Kirchner was elected president. In 2007, Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner, Nestor Kirchner's wife, was elected president. In 2012, the AMLV was founded. And then in 2015, Mauricio Macri was elected president. And so these are all events that I'm going to be talking about, and they all relate back to soybean extractivism, I promise. So first off, I wanted to talk about the Kirchner administrations. And so this was Nestor Kirchner and Cristina Fernandez, as pictured here. And so Nestor Kirchner served one term starting in 2003, and then Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner served two terms in 2007, and then her next one was in 2012. So these two presidents were pink tide leftist leaders, and so this was that shift away from the neoliberalist practices that were popular before, and they were more progressive. So in their administrations, they were fairly similar. They continued the reliance on the extraction of natural resources for socioeconomic development. However, they kind of swung it in a way that made it more favorable for people of like the working or lower classes. And so the government retained control on the profits of this extractivism with the goal of social redistribution. And so with the profits of this extractivism, they gave this money back to the poor in order to kind of stimulate more economic growth for that social class. So soybean exports were taxed at a fairly high rate, 30 to 35% at its highest. And so this tax was used to fund a variety of social and infrastructure development programs, which made this tax, it wasn't a favorable tax for like the big like producers of soybeans. And so these were like more like upper 1% kind of people, but it was really favorable for those like lower class, working class people. And so with that tax, they were able to legitimize and build support for this extractivism. So although it wasn't like extractivism obviously isn't good, especially for like indigenous populations. However, it was favorable because it was helping revitalize some of that economic activity for the lower classes. So moving on, we after those administrations, we had the Macri administration, and so this was Mauricio Macri, who was elected in 2015, and so he was kind of like not a pink tide leader. He aimed to turn Argentina into an agro-industrial powerhouse. And so instead of this agricultural and economic growth benefiting the poor, he really wanted to present Argentina as like somewhere where it was profitable for the big business leaders and the social elites. And so he reduced the agro export taxes to incentivize production. And so we saw the soybean tax drop 5% annually. And this is something that we're still seeing. This is a recent development. Although he's no longer in power, a lot of these policies are still maintained. And so large-scale extractivism will likely continue with these practices. And along with this, the support and legitimacy that we were just discussing will fade. The wealth distribution programs are diminishing. We're seeing that tax that was helping fund those programs, we're seeing that dropping. And so those big business leaders are able to maintain more of their profits while the lower classes are not seeing the same economic benefit that they previously were with the previous administrations. So I wanted to discuss large-scale soy production and what the impacts of this were. And so large-scale soy production was really started in Argentina with the adoption of this technological package. And the two main things in this were genetically modified seeds and then agrochemical spraying and no-till machinery, which is that has to do with like soil and how the soil is impacted by this. And so with large-scale soy production, we saw economic benefit at the expense of social and environmental consequences. And so some of these consequences include deforestation, the displacement of indigenous families, and increased health risks from this agrochemical spraying. And so this large-scale soy production has triggered social and environmental protest movements, which we will soon get into. But overall, large-scale soy production, good for the economy if you're like one of like the big leaders, but bad for you if you are living next to these fields where the spraying is occurring, if you are a worker on one of these fields, etc. And so I really wanted to have these two maps here to kind of contextualize like what region we are talking about and what communities are being impacted by this farming. And so on the I think it's going to be the left, bad at directions, I'm sorry. We see a map showing where soybeans are grown in Argentina. And so this dark green area is where it's majorly grown. And then those lighter green areas are minor growing areas, but we're still seeing that large scale soybean growth there. And then on the other side here, we can see the indigenous communities that live in these areas. And so kind of comparing these two maps, we're seeing some of these more northwestern peoples being impacted. And so looking at the little key right here, the Chinese and the Pampas are being mostly impacted by this. They've been violently forced off of their land in a lot of cases. And then also we're seeing the Tobas and the Guaranias being also impacted by this, maybe not quite as much, but they're still being forced off of their land. Their health is still being horribly impacted by the spraying. And so I think these maps are a really good way of showing like where we are, where we're talking about, and who's being impacted by this production. And so I wanted to get into some of the resistance movements. So there's two main resistance movements that popped up that had like the greatest impacts on the soybean production. The first of these, which you'll see talked about probably the most, is the Mothers of Ituzaingó. And so this was a group founded in early 2002 by 16 working class women. They weren't very educated, but they wanted to know why so many of their family and community members were sick and dying. This was something that was newly happening, and they really weren't quite sure of the cause. And so they hypothesized that it was due to the crop dusters spraying agrochemicals over the fields down the street from them. They noticed that when the spraying occurred, people would suffer from headaches and coughing and rashes and other physical ailments that were new, but they kind of worked in tangent with the spraying. That was something newly happening with the rise of the large-scale soybean production. And so this group of working class women pressured the authorities to test the water and run blood studies, and they found that there were higher than average residues of agrochemical pollutants in the water and in their bodies. And so with this, they were able to win a historic lawsuit against a soy producer and a crop duster for willful environmental pollution. They were able to use this scientific knowledge over the impacts of this spraying on the communities to really help this case. And the work of this group also continues to this day, kind of a bittersweet thing because it's good to see that this is a group that is resilient and able to keep fighting. However, it also shows that we're not seeing the improvements and the communication that would really help resolve these issues rather than having to continue the group. And so on this slide, I included an image of some of the women in one of their protests. They, I don't know what to say about it. I can't read Spanish, I'm going to be honest, but that's an image. And then here's the next group that was really prominent in this resistance to the soybean production. And so this was the AMLV. And so this was a group organized by a coalition of neighbors in 2012 to stop the construction of a plant pending environmental impact assessments. And so this plant was to be a genetically modified seed factory that would very, very likely spew toxic fumes into their air. This group of neighbors was aware that the corruption in the government in collusion with these companies would likely allow them to pass these assessments without having to change this pollution factor. And then another really prominent thing about this was that this plant was to be located half a mile away from a local school. And so members were especially concerned about children's health in this. And this is something that we also saw with that previous group. This was mainly mothers concerned about their children and about the children in the community. And so the AMLV was able to successfully create a permanent halt to the construction of this plant in 2013. And in 2017, the company sold the land and they left the area. And so this was a really successful case of resistance. But yeah, so moving on. I think it's really important to discuss the gender dimensions of this conflict. Something that really stuck out for me from the readings about extractivism was how this is a topic that really uniquely impacts women. I do consider myself a feminist, and I think that women are really uniquely impacted by a lot of things, and this is obviously no different. And so starting off, men compose a significant majority of executive government positions and high-level agribusiness jobs. These are male-dominated fields. It's the man's place to be in these roles. And then even when women hold these high-level executive positions, they're likely to align themselves with this gendered male-dominated norm rather than embracing their own gender identity and the unique perspectives that come from that. When women are able to achieve these roles, which is already fairly unlikely just because they're seen as male roles, they're likely to just try to blend in as to not draw attention to themselves because they know they could be fired or not reelected if they don't fit in with that status quo that they're expected to really uphold. And so going with that, gender can be used as a tool for manipulation. In a lot of cases, we see that the status quo is maintained through normalized systems of oppression, and one of these is gender. And so subordinate groups, such as women, must feel like they have to accept their inferior position, and this allows for these harmful practices that really only benefit the dominant groups in society to continue. And so in this case, upholding gender norms allows for government and these large soybean companies to amass more profit than they would if they took into consideration women's concerns like these environmental and health impacts that we're seeing. And then another thing that I thought was really telling was that the resistance movements were mainly led by and composed of women. And so women tend to express a greater concern for children's health because of their roles as mothers and caretakers. And so women, in this case, women found community through their shared identities as mothers, and they use this as a catalyst for their activist work, which I find really powerful. And so through this, they're also able to legitimize their activism through these identities as mothers and caregivers, which allows them to challenge the status quo. So when someone's saying, why do you even care? Why are you doing this work? They're able to say, I'm a mother. I'm concerned for my child. I am concerned for my husband. It is my role to take care of them, to say, because that really is their the role that they tend to play in society, and they're using that, they're grabbing that power that they have, because there is power in that position, even if it's considered a subordinate role, and they're using that, they're turning it around to make changes. So I think that gender dimension is really powerful in this case. And so that is my research on the extractivism of soybeans in Argentina. I found this to be a really interesting topic. I especially really latched onto that gendered perspective. And yes, I really enjoyed learning about this. I do not know how to stop sharing my screen. Oh, that is how you do it. Okay. So I appreciate this opportunity to learn about this, and I look forward to expanding on my knowledge on this topic and similar topics in the future. So I appreciate this course. Thank you so much.